The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. Welcome to the Lemonade Car Show. I'm your host, Lorraine Sommerfeld. We're brought to you by OMVIC, Crown, Hotspot Auto Parts, and Sound Insurance. I'm joined today by John Raymond. He's with the APA. And our professor mechanic, Chris Muir, joins us again. We have a full half hour of mechanicking things. So we're going to be handling everything. We have some calls a little bit later in the show, but we're coming into the winter season. There's lots of stuff people should be knowing about their car. Chris, I want to ask you something for the people who forget the snow stuff. If I'm heading down to what's left of Florida,
right,
can I leave winter tires on? Should I not have them on? What do we do when you're driving? Part of the way is going to be snow and ice, but when you're down there, it's not. Are your all seasons okay to get there? Is that?
It depends on the conditions that you leave in. If you were to leave, it's a little rainy, it's getting close to zero, you'll probably get out of the snow belt before it hits. If you're leaving in the dead of winter, leave the snows on the car. You don't want to go through the mountains in Vermont and all of a sudden find out that you don't have the traction that you need. To be down in Florida, if you're going for a week or two, you're not going to hurt your winter tires. Just think of it as a really warm spell. You'll be okay. If you're going down there for a long period of time, wear your snows down there, put on your summers when you get there. Pack them. If you're going down for, yeah, absolutely, it's safety first.
Leave your winter tires on. Winter tires today last anywhere from 50 to 70,000 kilometers. Mm-hmm. If you drive 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers, it's not going to change anything.
No.
Okay.
Better to be safe.
Okay. Next question I want to ask you, it's kind of in this vein of traveling. You see RVs and they're towing their get-around car because they're C-class, so they're driving the actual RV. So when they get where they're going, they need something to get around in. Is it better to have that on a trailer, or what's happening to that car? The wheels are taking, the tires are taking all the mileage, being towed behind, the transmission is in neutral. What's the upside and downside to towing something like that, like a...
So the advantage of flat towing is what it's called, is that you don't have the weight of the trailer underneath the car. So in theory, you can tow a larger car and it's easier to hook it up and unhook it because it's got dedicated pins and tow bars. You don't have to worry about strapping the car down on a trailer and the right way to do it and all of that stuff. If you're looking to buy a car, I would never recommend something that's been flat towed. You don't know how the owner's flat towed it, if they've had proper turning mechanisms in it, or if they've dragged the front tires and front suspension sideways every time they've gone around a corner. You have to wire the car so the brakes will apply with the tow vehicle. So there's often wiring and holes in the firewall to apply the brakes. It's not the ideal way to tow a car. The ideal way is to put it on a flat deck trailer and strap it down by the suspension and tow the car around.
So not
like
drag
that.
it.
Not drag it.
And if it's four-wheel drive, those rear wheels will be turning and damaging the transmission. Somebody's not going to drop the drive shaft just to tow the vehicle.
Because I see that, I think, that's got to be not great, but I see it a lot.
It's not great, but it's a solution.
Okay.
Right. It'll work good enough. And there's specific vehicles that can be flat towed, and there's other ones that the manufacturer says cannot be flat towed. So you have to be very, very careful if they can be flat towed at all. And then the procedure for decommissioning the driveline while it's being towed is very specific. Some of them, you can't have the transfer case in anything but neutral. If the transmission's spinning, there's no fluid in the pump and you're damaging the transmission, stuff like that.
Okay, so if you're going into this RVing world and considering doing this, do your homework on your car if you're bringing it with you. Back to winter stuff. What should we be doing if we are storing a car and leaving it here? I know people are wondering, a lot of people put it in a garage, which is ideal. What should they do before they stow their car for the winter?
Big thing is indoors is best if you can. You want climate controlled so there's not a whole bunch of humidity. Humidity is what really kills them. Cold humidity, salt, stuff like that. So indoors is ideal. You want to remove the load from the tires in order to save the tire itself, or put on just a set of what we call rollers. Bad tires that you put on the car just to let it sit still, because that load will actually flatten the belt and you'll have a flat spot in the tire when you take it out in the spring. Sometimes you can drive out of it, sometimes you can't. Mothballs in the interior, something to deter pests. from coming into the
Engine
car
compartment.
or engine compartment.
They need the wiring. No?
Yeah, they love wiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. We usually find mice or squirrels inside the engine compartment have chewed up fuel injection wires because the engine was warm at one point, or it had a few cubbies where they could sleep in, and the insulation from the hood drop. So that sheet that you have underneath your hood,
Very tasty.
it's very good for making nests.
Oh, okay.
So anything to deter the animals from getting to it, and stabilizing the fuel and fogging the engine are both great ideas as
Should
well.
you do an oil change before it goes in, or just when it comes out?
Doing an oil change before it goes in is ideal. You remove any acids that you've got from the crankcase already, and then in the spring it's ready to go. It hasn't deteriorated over the winter. It's not a whole bunch different than storing it in a jug. Using a synthetic.
We're going to come back after this break. We obviously have way more to talk about storing your car for the winter. We'll be back, more Lemonade. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. Welcome back to Lemonade. I'm your host, Lorraine Sommerfeld. I'm speaking with John Raymond and Chris Muir. Right now we're talking about what to do with your car before winter hits if you're not driving it. I don't know if I know I cut you off because I always cut you off, but change the oil before it goes in the garage.
Yeah, before you put it in the garage, change the oil in the car. A synthetic, is what I was saying before the break, is a great idea simply because it's of a uniform size and it likes to leach or get stuck to different surfaces. So when you start the car in the spring, you have less of a risk of a dry start. The other thing, coming back to a stored car in the spring, disable the engine from starting, but crank it over until you have oil pressure.
What does that mean? Explain that.
So when you have an engine that's shut off, everything rests together. The crank is touching the bearings, and the camshafts are touching its bearings, and there's no lubricant on any of the chains or anything that needs the oil to be on surfaces. When an engine's actually running, the crank never touches the bearings and the cam never touches the bearing. It actually rides on a very thin film of oil. The nice thing about cars is they have check valves that hold oil pressure at those specific areas for initial startup. So you start up the car and you're not waiting for the oil to leave the sump, to go through the filter, to get to those components. But we leave a car for a long period of time, well now all of that oil pressure or all of that oil volume is bled down back into the oil pan. So we start up the car and we are doing severe wear to bearing components that aren't
dry.
actually supposed to touch.
So how do you do what you said?
So instead of firing the car up and having it run at a few thousand RPM until it can build oil pressure, what we do is we either remove the fuse for the fuel pump or the spark plugs and crank the engine over using the key until we see a little bit of movement on the oil pressure gauge. That tells us that there's oil at the components that need lubrication. At that point, you can put your fuse back in, have fuel supplied to the engine, have spark supplied to the engine, and it'll fire up with oil on those surfaces.
There are a lot of people that think that they should start their car during storage once a month, start it up, drive it around. What do you think about that?
So driving it around absolutely defeats the point of storing a car. You're pounding salt into it, you're pounding snow underneath it, and then you bring it into a nice warm garage where that salt and the snow can leach through all of your seams over the course of the winter. You've absolutely defeated yourself completely. So driving it around is a big no-no. Running a car in an enclosed space, it's a bit deadly, but you open the door, you run the car once a month. You want to make sure it's up to operating temperature. If the car isn't hot, all you're doing is creating condensation inside of the engine, inside of the exhaust. You'll have acids build up in the engine, and you're going to have water sitting in the exhaust, so it'll rot the exhaust and do, again, bearing damage.
How long do you let it idle or run if you're going to start it up
You're
once a month?
going to want to actually bring it up to temperature. You're into an hour and a half to 2 hours worth.
Seriously?
Yeah.
This is my surprise face.
Yeah, you want to be able to burn off any moisture. You want that thing hot, like silly hot, like you just got off the highway hot, so nothing can condense in it. It evaporates all of the moisture in it.
Okay, so let's assume nobody does that. What sort of battery
Disconnect.
Should they disconnect the battery? Should they remove the battery?
Again, it depends on the electronics in the car and the routines that it has to go through in order to realize what it is again. If it's got a lot of driver adapts and you want to come back to your really nice car, press the driver one button, your seat goes exactly to where it was, and it remembers all your radio presets. A battery tender is a great idea. I mean, buy it for your car freak friend for Christmas. Plug it into the wall. It monitors the condition of the battery. If the battery starts to discharge, it charges it slowly on a trickle. It's something that you plug it in and forget all about it. It's really a really neat toy. If you're going to store the car in a freezing condition, where you're going to be subjected to severe temperature below zero, wind gusts, stuff like that, removing the battery and storing it in a warmer place is not a bad idea as well. Not in the house.
How about blocking the exhaust?
You can block the exhaust. Don't forget about it in the spring. I mean, it's a sheltered area. It's definitely a sheltered area. Usually the engine firing up will fire out any little friends that you've collected in it over the winter. But hey, if you've got a screen or something like that that you can put over the tip, it's not a
Or
bad
steel
idea.
wall, something like that.
Yeah, it's certainly
Okay,
not a
so
bad
the people who aren't using their cars in the winter, we've got them covered, and that's good. The people who are using their cars all winter, here we go. There's idling bylaws in
Yes,
place everywhere. You can't catch anyone idling because by the time you call bylaw and they get there, nobody cares, the guy's gone.
Yep.
Sorry, the woman's gone. Cars don't need to warm up anymore.
No.
In the old days, my dad go out, start it up, let it start up for an hour or
And then
whatever.
read the paper.
Oh yeah, and then go back out and there's all this crap in the air, and that's why we are where we are. But cars don't need to warm up, they just need to be gently driven.
Yes.
This is an argument still over
As soon as-
Thanksgiving and Christmas table.
As soon as you have oil pressure, if you're going to take the car through a day-to-day routine, and this is not the same as the guy that starts it once a month and warms it up.
You know, we're
We're
daily
talking
drivers now.
about this is daily drivers. You're going to warm it up driving it your hour and some to work, right? So as soon as that car has oil pressure, it is fine to drive. That is vroom. You're ready to go. If you can see through the window, drive the car.
Okay, you know what? We're going to come back after this break because I want to talk about what happens when the gas doesn't get burned off because of people who are idling. We'll be right back with more Lemonade after this break. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. Welcome back to the Lemonade Car Show, brought to you by OMVIC and Crown. I'm Lorraine Sommerfeld. I'm here with John Raymond and Chris Muir. We're talking about cars in winter and what to do, and idling, which you're not supposed to do. Why shouldn't you idle?
So, modern cars focus on fuel emissions, I should say. When you fire up a car and you idle it, you do not create enough heat in the exhaust in order to fire up the oxygen sensor in a timely manner. So you are dumping what we call a base fuel map, which dumps fuel in because it's thinking it's cold, which it is. So it accounts for any fuel that won't turn into a vapor. It counts for liquid fuel. So you're dumping fuel into the engine. The fuel then comes out of the engine in an unburnt fashion. So that's detriment number one. Old cars, we used to have to wait until it warmed up for drivability. The carburetor would pull the choke off of it. You'd be able to drive. Modern cars, as soon as the thing is running, it's doing all of its own calculations. It knows what temperature it is outside, what the density of the areas that it's bringing in, exactly how much fuel to mix with it, and then it fine-tunes that trim with sensors inside of the exhaust, your oxygen sensors. We also need to warm up the catalyst in order for it to function. It fires off at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. In order to warm up that catalyst, we need a decent amount of exhaust velocity and volume in order to warm it up. So by idling it in the driveway, all you're doing is you're dumping fuel out the tailpipe. It is doing the engine absolutely no favors. You're not stressing it out or anything else. You're just delaying the inevitable emissions controls from coming online.
Also, warm up is a lot longer. So if you drive off, your heating and ventilation system will keep you warm quicker than if you just sit in the driveway and just idle.
Yeah.
And the one thing I used to think was just a plus, a happy plus, was heated seats. Now I realize I wouldn't buy a car without them because if you heat up your seat, which heats up very quickly in most cars, it's not so important to have the whole cabin heated because your butt's warm and it's a lot more comfortable. And actually now I have the heated steering wheel on. Today I put it on, I couldn't believe it, it's October. So.
And then the other day I was in a German make with Yeah,
German
need a
made.
neck warmer.
Oh,
so
Mercedes.
I said, you know,
Yeah.
so, now we've gone from the heated seats to the heated seat, and then the neck warmer. It's just like wonderful. I'll never leave the car.
Yeah, it's like it's a neck scarf they call it.
Yeah.
It blows on the back of your neck.
Air
It's
scarf.
awesome. Air
That's it.
scarf. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. Yeah. That's funny. Is there anything else that you think we should be considering for winter? I hope everyone got their crown or another rust proofing done. It's a good time of year to do it. Actually, spring is a good
Winter
time as
maintenance,
well.
they should do their oil changes and check their light bulbs.
Get
That's
a-
your subject.
It's a general inspection time of year. Make sure that all of your running lights are working. Okay, make sure you know how to use those running lights. Make sure that they come on because we're getting dark earlier and earlier already. You want to make sure that the car's in good mechanical shape. Get your winter tires put on.
Get your winter tires on. Then it gets under a mechanic and they'll see all this stuff. We'll be back after this break with more Lemonade Car Show. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. The Lemonade Car Show is sponsored by OMVIC, Ontario's vehicle sales regulator. Welcome back to the Lemonade Car Show, brought to you by OMVIC and Crown. I'm Lorraine Sommerfeld. I'm here with John Raymond and Chris Muir, and we're doing a whole show on mechanic stuff. Let's go to the phones. We have some questions.
Hi, my name is Peter. I come from London, and I have a 2013 Toyota Corolla, and I don't know, I make about 4,000 kilometers a year. I have to change oil every 2 times a year, or 1 time a year will be enough. Thank you.
Great question, and we get a lot, and it's a good question. Do you go by the kilometers, or do you go by the month?
Whatever comes first.
Okay.
So you may not reach the kilometers, but if you're not reaching the kilometers, my wager is it's probably a whole bunch of little tiny trips all throughout that period of time. And what you're doing is you're starting a cold engine, you've got condensing fuel, it's blowing by the piston rings, you're putting gasoline and humidity into the engine oil, and the engine oil is doing its job. It's trapping those contaminants and isolating them from doing any damage to the internals of the engine. Now, because the time has passed and it's reached its maximum saturation point, it's time to change the oil. Doing less mileage doesn't do the engine any great service in the
Well, it's actually
in the
worse.
better. It's a bit worse.
Okay, so that's the long, complicated answer. The short answer is change your oil twice a year, even if you don't hit the
Follow the
kilometers that the
maintenance,
manual
the manual
is telling you.
twice a year. Is
So
fine.
whichever comes first
Yep.
is a good shorthand way of thinking
Certainly.
about that. So yeah, read your manual, do it twice a year because you're probably putting even more strain on your engine doing lower miles. Great. We have another question.
Oh, hi. I'd like to know about the any information that you have regarding the 4.7 Dodge Ram engine, 2012 Dodge Ram 4.7. Anything good or bad about it? Thank you.
I'm gonna throw this back to you again.
Yeah, the 4.7 is a bit of an engine oddity. It's not the new generation Hemi block, and it's not the old Magnum block like the 318 and the 360 were. It was developed during the Delmer Chrysler days, and it is a one-off engine that is known to have oiling problems, bearing problems, noise problems. They are not an engine that I would ever recommend somebody go after. Finding replacements in a wrecking yard in the aftermarket is like pulling teeth. They are gone. Engine builders want very little to do with them. They're just, it's the one to avoid. It's the one you don't want.
Okay, step up or
unfortunately.
step down.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you already own one, be aware that
Be
you're going to
aware,
be facing some
baby
issues.
that engine.
Okay.
Oil changes on time. Don't abuse it. It should last.
Okay. See, this is why this show is nice. We're not going to trash you if you already have that because people have them. So be aware, be cautious,
Yep.
and take care of it. But if you're shopping for it, move along because you
Yes.
don't need to buy someone else's orphan problems.
Certainly.
And at that time, that 2012, there was already the Hemi, which had the cylinder deactivation
Yep.
on those
Yep.
ones.
You've got
Anyways.
good mileage.
Yeah.
You've got a cam and block engine, which is a more traditional design than this dual overhead cam 4.7, or sorry, single overhead cam 4.7. It would, again, it just wasn't the engine to go after.
Okay, so if you're shopping, you've got better options.
Much.
If you own it, take care of it.
Take care of it. Okay. Another question.
Hello, it's Saturday midday, and I'm watching your show. And I got a question in regards to potholes and their effects on cars. And whose liability is that? I've gone through now my second front end on my Infiniti G30 5X. I've had to replace the lower ball joints on both. Lower ball joints and swing arms on both sides, left and right. And I'm going to be doing it again this year. And I really am fed up with stuff. I don't like being a person that dodges around them, because there's always, people beside you and cyclists and things. But, that's my main concern, but also is the cost that these things, these repairs lay on me.
That reminds me, it's my time of year to write my pothole column. I do one of these every year. Andre, I feel for you, and they seem to be getting worse. I know I say that every year as well.
Why? The potholes are getting worse, but also car design has changed. With multi-link suspensions, it's not like the old days. So suspensions are a lot more complicated with a lot more moving parts, and we're seeing, as an industry, a lot more issues and replacement of parts.
I'm going to answer his first question about whose fault is this or what does he do with this. Every jurisdiction, every municipality has their own laws about this. I know Toronto, which turns down almost every application they get, you have to report within 24 hours and you need photos. So if it happens on the 401 and you're squinched down with your iPhone trying to get a photo of it, it's incredibly hard. But if you can get a photo, which we all have one in our hands, put something in the pothole for, when they put a penny or something so you can see how deep it is. You can apply to the cities for reimbursement. Most of them are going to turn it down. Again, it's within 24 hours, which is brutal. I don't know Hamilton area. You'd have to look that up. I know Toronto and Oakville. The other thing is they're going to tell you to go through your insurance. Mm-hmm. And that is a comp claim. I wish we had Debbie here at the moment. So, and I'm glad you're not swerving into cyclists. That's very cool. But the damage you're doing to the front end is brutal, and there was part of Main Street in Hamilton that was destroyed last summer. Oh, you couldn't even go down it. Mm-hmm. And so many people are driving SUVs now. They're banging through them, but they're doing damage too, aren't
sure
they?
they are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure they are, yeah. I mean, one of the most popular things that we do in the shop day in, day out is front end work, right? Ball joints and tie rods and things that take that impact certainly is something that we do. We see more cars, or we see different cars more often than not, but we start to see patterns emerge at which ones are going to have the front end problems. And unfortunately, G35, we used to make quite a bit of money off G35s at Nissan because of that compression rod front end and the ball joints. It was a design flaw in the car more so than the way it was driven quite often.
In the environment that we live in, we used to say brakes was the single biggest expense after tires going up to 160,000 kilometers. Mm-hmm. Now it's suspension components.
Certainly it is.
So
yeah, almost double actually of actual friction or brake components.
This may be a stupid question. I'm going to ask it for Andre anyway. If he slows right down to go through it, would that help?
It lessens
sometimes?
the impact.
Okay,
it
but it's still not
lessens the
great.
force,
Unless
but it's,
he's on his foot is on the brake in the hole.
Yeah.
And
then you're trying to bind the wheel as it hits an impact, and you're putting more force through it instead of gliding over top of it.
Okay, so sorry, Andre, check the municipality where you live to see if there's any kind of recompense you can get through them. If not, check your insurance policy, which I know we don't want to do because it jacks rates on it. So I'm very sorry we don't have a better answer for you. That's all the time we have for Lemonade. I'm Lorraine Sommerfeld. John Raymond, Chris Muir. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Omvic Crown, Hotspot Auto, and Sound Insurance. Thanks to you, viewers.